he had his tallness advantaging him, I guess, in this height-obsessed corporate world, really. And, not all, but many of these tall CEOs, they didn't really, I highly doubt they had to work hard for that position. Whereas a lot of the short men do, and a lot of people admit that. Again, if they're favoring, a lot of it comes down to the committees in recruitment. That's actually one of the, I guess, the traits they look for in a potential candidate when hiring or promoting. And a lot of it is stature, height, both for men and women. So, and again, whether it's female-dominated fields or male-dominated fields, there still is that discrimination. There still is that that tallness favoritism. And again, so like with this whole all men are oppressed, if all men are oppressed, and that includes tall men, or at least, if tall men are also heavily discriminated against for being men, on the virtue of just being men, well, why on earth would the very thing that oppresses them, in this case, women, or the gynocentric system, why would it hire them and promote them and favour them and pretty much help them thrive in life simply due to their tall stature? Like, that's paradoxical. So again, that everything I just mentioned about the workplace and occupational, tall favoritism / misandric shortism discrimination, that kind of disproves the whole, shared struggle between tall men and short men, or even average height men. Because it's true. Why would an oppressor advantage or make life easier for the oppressed, for the people they're oppressing? What that proves as well is, especially in the more female-dominated fields, is that, yes, if there is misandry, it's going to affect most men, but they still, again, they have their favourites, though. So it's it will affect a lot of men, but there's always going to be the top-tier men who, again, meet some type of physical attractiveness criterion, in this case tallness, that are kind of, again, they kind of overcome that misandry in the workplace, if that makes sense. I don't want to be just going on and on and on. Even in male-dominated fields, like a lot of the blue-collar work, the trades, vocational work, a lot of that, a lot of that's male-dominated, especially like trades. But, that's permeated with misandric shortism. They're going to favour tall men over short men any day of the week, especially because it's manual labour. So they're going to see this, the tall guy is more physically competent over the short man. And so even outside of the workplace, or the political, economic side of things, that favoritism also extends on a social level. For example, when society is when they're not busy pedestalizing tall men, they're empathizing with tall men as well. Tall guys who have their struggles or predicaments. So even if a tall guy is going through something, is experiencing something, he's going to have people. He's more likely to have people empathizing with him and having an understanding, and allowing him to vent and to, to show vulnerability, and they'll empathize. This photo here, I'll show you. I know I've showed this before, and I know the writing's blurred, but on this side you've got the tall, aggressive veteran. He's even making threats. He's getting physically intimidating, and people on progressive dominated Reddit, empathizing with him because he's a veteran. But, when you're a veteran, you kind of make that choice to kind of join the military and fulfill your bloodlust. But, here there's a video of a short guy. I don't know what happened. I guess he was angry. He was probably rude. Maybe he had a problem, but, the comments is just full of, just full of misandric shortest remarks. Like, they go to attack his height. That's like the first thing they do. So, like, look at Bagel Boss. Like, you've got this video here of the tall veteran who's gone to countries killing other innocent men to fulfill his bloodlust, and then, he's still seen as like a gentle giant that's just misunderstood and, needs society's help. But then you got Bagel Boss, who was getting picked on. They don't show the full story, the full video of that. He's getting picked on by the women. He's getting berated for his height in public. He loses it, rightfully so. Like, he gets really angry. Then he gets assaulted on top of it. And, everyone mocks him and even, just full on goes against him. There's no support for him whatsoever. Very few people do. A lot of people were even saying, like, how he deserved to have more than just be tackled down. He should have been, that, people were saying that little dwarf, that little hobbit should have been slammed on the ground. I wish I was there. I would have ripped him in two. Little man syndrome. So, again, even on a social level, when tall men do have their predicaments or they're facing misandry, they're gonna gain empathy. They're gonna get that empathy from society, from men, from women, from everyone. Even feminists, again, I've argued with many of these types of feminists, whether they're lib fems and ranfems, whatever turfs, and they too, even the women I know in real life who are quite feminist leaning, or just women in general, they too will empathize with tall men. And not only that, but they glorify tall men, and I've already said this many times before, but they portray them in a positive light. They vindicate tall men, and by vindicate, they view tall men and portray tall men as innocent. They very, you hear that a lot. Like, it's always the tall men who are the gentle giants. It's always the tall men who are the nice ones. It's always the short men who are the little evil gremlins with little man syndrome and they're nasty, blah blah. Like, you'll see a lot of that type of commentary, and tall men are vindicated. Whereas, and portrayed in a positive light, where short men are demonized and vilified. And it's even done by these, hardcore extreme red fem types, the so-called proud misandrists. They literally put it in their bios, or they even say, I'm a misandrist and I'm proud, I hate all men, kill all men, all those types. Even they will come to, tall men's defense. I mean, all of them have tall boyfriends and husbands, and they brag about it. They're very explicit with their eugenicist stances. They don't hide away how much they find short men to be dysgenic and how we should be eradicated. I've dealt with this many times. They'll still gaslight us and say it's all in our head, but then they're admitting it themselves. Their disdain for short men. And again, these same feminists might malignantly collectivize all men, but really, when it comes down to it, they still hold tall men to a more honourable regard as opposed to short men. So I think a lot of this, their malignant collectivization of all men as bad, or their misandry is just rather performative. And again, there's more of an intersection with these so-called misandric feminists. So there's more of an intersection of the types of men they really hate. And again, most often than not, it's going to be physically unattractive men, short, ugly, bold, low-tier men. And it makes sense because, feminism sort of has its roots in eugenics, or it consists of eugenics. And, the early feminist agenda was all about pretty much, how do I say it? I guess exterminating 90% of men and leaving only the top tier 10% of men. And if you read into a lot of early feminist works, or even the early eugenicists, who again, a lot of them were feminists, they were always promoting this idea of good quality men and pushing and encouraging women to select men of good quality and good physique. Like the Fabian Society, look up them in their early days, they were eugenicists, and a lot of the members were also feminists. What's his name? Like Bernard Shaw? And they were all for, female selection being superior, and how women should have the freedom to select men of good quality, good physical quality. And we all know what that means. So it makes sense why these feminists are going to have a bias against short men and then favoritism for tall men. It's what their ideology consists of. And a lot of this empathy as well, the social empathy, whatever you want to call it, how that tall men receive, it comes down to the intersectional power tall men have over short men. The whole status versus stigma. So, tall men get the status, the good status. And, they reap the benefits of traditional masculinity. They're seen as the ideal physical embodiment of masculinity. Strong, capable, leader-like, warrior-like, authoritative. They're like the epitome of what it means to be a real man. Whereas with short men, it's like the complete opposite. We're seen as weak, insecure, physically incapable, effeminate, unmasculine, infantile, overcompensating. Everything we do is just overcompensating or correlated with our height. So, the illusion that all men share a struggle and are equally discriminated against is just, it's false, and it's straight out dismissive. And it's pretty counterproductive as well, in some ways. But yeah, it's hogwash. Like, to say that tall men are equally heavily discriminated against, the same as men of other statures, of lower statures, physically lower, that's just false. It's hogwash. And it kind of ignores the reality of tall men being the default beneficiaries of the high premium / favoritism. So when you've got evidence showing that they are beneficiaries, despite living under this matriarchy, they are beneficiaries of some type of privilege solely based on their height, due to their height. You're and then at the same time they're heavily discriminated against. And again, I say heavily because I understand tall men can still be discriminated against on the basis of gender for being a man in some cases, but not heavily. So yeah, it kind of ignores. Yeah, if they're discriminated at the same time while being beneficiaries of something, like, it's paradoxical, and yeah, just straight out, it's quite ignorant. It's an ignorant take and illogical, I guess, because like that photo comparison I showed between the tall veteran and the short guy on Reddit, and that post was from our short guys as well. Short men, that proves that short men face more social penalties than that of a tall man will. And, I've already explained given these examples before. Whatever, to put it short, everything a short man does is little man syndrome or overcompensating. And, his actions, whether good or bad, it's almost always correlated with his height. Whereas a tall man, won't face that. So yeah, like, someone who's truly oppressed wouldn't have these benefits, these advantages. Especially in this case, if women are oppressing men, then why is it that tall men are more likely to have these advantages? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. because I admit we live under a patriarchy. Sorry,